I'm afraid it's finally time for me to come out about this. I used to be a Professor Layton hater. My first exposure to the series were trailers for the upcoming Miracle Mask. I was skeptical about what I saw. A game where you read a bunch of dialogue and solve puzzles? Sounds lame. I then promptly forgot Professor Layton ever existed. But a few years later, after a watch-through of some Ace Attorney playthroughs and playing through the first 4 games myself, I decided there wouldn't be any harm in picking up the crossover that was about to come out. As you may well know, that game left a considerable impact, enough for me to finally entertain the idea of starting the Layton series, despite the fact that I greatly preferred the courtroom segments of Versus over the Layton puzzle solving. To say I was unimpressed with Curious Village on first go-round would be an understatement. I found very little charming about the village of Saint Mystère. The game just had this overwhelmingly beige, brownish color palette I couldn't stand. Every avenue, every building, even most of the characters. Old, blank, and beige. It all looked so drab, almost as if you could smell the mold festering on the musty street corners and pouring out of the DS screen. For being a visual novel, the visuals left a lot to be desired by my estimation. Coming in from the crossover, I was expecting some kind of gripping, involved story like that game had, but there was little story to be found in Curious Village. The overwhelming amount of time was being spent on puzzle after puzzle, and the characters only had a few terse lines of dialogue at most. Maybe that would be okay if the puzzles were fun to solve, but math? Just no. Hint coins weren't even worth bothering with at this point. I quickly broke out an online guide to get through these torturous problems and forced myself to finish. Well, after one playthrough of Curious Village, it seemed my initial reaction to Professor Layton was all but confirmed. Ace Attorney had shown me that reading dialogue boxes could in fact be a lot of fun, but gum up the works with a bunch of irrelevant puzzles? Yup, pretty lame. Still, I wasn't ready to give up just yet. I mean, I liked the crossover a lot. That couldn't have just been because of Ace Attorney, right? So I was prepared to give the series one more shot. I would play the second game, Diabolical Box, and if that didn't work for me either, fine. I'll call it there. At least I could say I gave the series more than its fair chance. To say I was impressed with Diabolical Box on first go-round would be an understatement. Utterly enchanted might be closer to the truth. The presentational differences were immediately striking. Characters were facing each other when talking. There was more dialogue and cutscenes to get invested in. Even though I still wasn't totally sold on the puzzles yet, they did seem to relate to what was going on better, and far more doable to my 13-year-old brain. Probably thanks to there being a few less line segments. And when I arrived in Full Sense, it was all over. The music, the atmosphere, the colors. Yes, this was everything I was looking for. I remember binging through the entire second half of the game in a single evening, happily tapping away, eagerly anticipating the answer behind the murderous Elysian box. After that, the rest of the series was history, as I systematically played through every remaining Layton game in less than 2 months' time. Looking back, it's hard not to think I may have been a little unfair to Curious Village. Considering the Layton series in its totality, the game my beloved Diabolical Box sits closest to, stylistically and substantively, is clearly Curious Village. Is there really such a gulf in quality between the two games? It's a question I repeatedly ask myself whenever I replay Curious Village, and the answer I've discovered is no, but also most definitely yes. It may require some further explanation. It's easy to see what would have turned me off on Curious Village all those years ago. Curious Village is by far the most game-like entry in the Layton series, the narrative often seeming more like a pretext for the puzzles than a key pillar of the game in its own right. It's an idea reinforced by its structure. While all Layton games have had a chapter-based approach, Curious Village's application isn't quite the same. The chapter breaks don't signify anything terribly important. Chapters simply end when a specific goal has been reached, and the next chapter doesn't begin when the previous one ends, but when a new goal is directly declared by the characters. Rather than narrative chunks in a book, chapters in Curious Village feel more like quest objectives than anything else, stamped with a little solved icon when completed. This gaminess is especially the case in the first few chapters, which consist of a whole lot of aimless wandering around Saint Mystère. First to find the Reinhold Manor, then to find Lady Dahlia's cat, and then to find the missing Ramon. It's not really clear how any of these tasks are related to the search for the golden apple, at least in the moment, so they end up sucking up the momentum out of the story. St. Mystere is also quite small, so many of these objectives lead you circling back to many of the same locations. To be fair, there is a touch of excitement here and there. Simon's murder and the chase sequence with Bruno come first to mind, but these are a brief few minutes of intrigue in what is otherwise a roughly 3 to 4 hour chunk of nothing but solving one arbitrary puzzle after another. It's almost a relief when the Chapter 5 banner appears, announcing that you'll finally be getting on task now that half the game is already over. It's hardly surprising that Chapter 5 is where Curious Village starts to pick up, telling its story in earnest. All of this could be easily alleviated if the puzzle solving that is most of Curious Village was something spectacular, but it really kind of isn't. Outside of Layton's mystery journey, I'd say Curious Village contains the most inconsistent selection of puzzles in the series, vacillating constantly between ideas so iconic future games would repeat them ad nauseum for the next 5 or 6 entries, to puzzles which are just absolute head-scratchers as to how they passed a QA meeting. Sometimes you'll get a classic like milk pitchers, where you need to distribute said pitcher of milk evenly using only 2 other pitchers. But other times it'll be nonsense riddles like puzzled aliens, where you need to identify that the object the aliens are confused about is a compass. Not a navigational compass, but like the drawing tool from your geometry class. Or for every light weight, where you can only experiment with the weights 2 times before singling out which weight is lighter than the others, you'll get a monster, where you have to point out the monster which is attacking the village, which is the moon for some reason. I still don't really understand this one, to be honest. Why is the moon considered the beast's eye? Eye of the night, I suppose? Or something like spare change, which isn't really so much a puzzle as it is a tedious counting exercise, the first hint basically admitting as much. And no summary of Curious Village's puzzles would be complete without perhaps the singular worst Layton puzzle, the chocolate code, where apparently you're supposed to figure out that the hidden message can be decrypted by examining the corresponding letter on a keyboard, and then moving across the keyboard in the direction of the bite mark which appears on the chocolate, based solely on the fact that the puzzle description describes the person in question as a technophile. If you manage to solve this without a hint or looking up the answer, I would genuinely love to know how you arrived at this. Unfortunately, as I'm sure you're beginning to notice here, I'd say the selection is more bad than it is good. This could be a result of only 30 of the puzzles being original to the game, the rest come from Akira Taga's books, but there's little information to what extent this process changed when developing future titles. Maybe it's merely a case of them learning which puzzles are best for a video game. It doesn't help matters that the game doesn't do a good job providing you with any tools to solve the puzzles, Curious Village being the only Layton game to lack a dedicated memo feature. And when a puzzle does allow you to draw, don't even think about consulting a hint, as that will erase any work you've done. All in all, Curious Village's puzzle solving is oftentimes more frustrating than it is fun. The characters in Curious Village are not nice, by which I mean the residents of St. Mystere are a collection of rude, hostile, arrogant people. Franco gets snippy at us when we ask to enter through the drawbridge. Marco blocks the path to Reinhold Manor, saying he doesn't trust us. Upon our introduction, Lady Dahlia exclaims, "Honestly, why am I constantly surrounded by incompetence?" proceeding to blame us for letting Claudia escape the manor. Chelmy acts as obstinacy incarnate over the course of the game. "Sorry, can't help you." And by can't, I mean don't want to, Adria declares bluntly, to even Layton's surprise. "Hey, what do you want? Start jawing so I can get back to dinner," Prosciutto makes clear. When we attempt to get access to the park, Rodney at Town Hall helpfully directs us to the caretaker. Now, unless you have some form you need to fill out, I strongly advise you to beat it. Townspeople in Layton games have always had a tendency to speak unfiltered, but Curious Village plays out like some kind of puzzle humiliation simulator. One villager even gets mad at you for solving their puzzles. Layton and Luke can barely take a step without having some passive-aggressive comment hurled their way. There's a sense in which Curious Village is being very deliberate about this. The villagers, as we later learn, are not real. They are machines, designed specifically to test and needle the seekers of the Golden Apple. The residents here aren't made to chat or become our friends, they're here only for us to prove our mettle. And that means making our stay as inhospitable as possible. When heading towards St. Mystere's only inn, Beatrice informs us that despite the fact that visitors are a rarity, she's currently remodeling all of the guest rooms, leaving only the attic space left for sleeping. Naturally, all the beds are being refurbished as well. How conveniently inconvenient. Climbing up the tower at the heart of St. Mystere, some of the villagers literally rush past us during our ascent just so they can stand in our way and give us more puzzles. It's rather ironic in hindsight. Just how much poking and prodding would you take before you give up on the treasure completely? Just how dedicated are you? I found the villagers to be absolutely insufferable on my first playthrough. Clearly, my younger self was not at all worthy of the golden apple. I fear I'm not quite doing the game justice. Though I rejected St. Mystere and its beigeness in the beginning, I find that the quaint little village has captured my imagination over time. The people may have been designed for a specific purpose, but they put on a pretty convincing autonomous act. As day shifts into night, they close up shop and empty the streets into bars or their own homes. The first few hours are perhaps a bit too much aimless wandering, but there's also an appeal in the game just giving us an excuse to do nothing but soak in the atmosphere. It's as if we're amateur ethnographers, observing and learning the motions of St. Mystere. It may also speak to something more about the Layton series as a whole. The assignment is rather unlike everything else, isn't it? That a system mostly known for Brain Age or Mario 64 or Pokemon should suddenly have a game trying to be an animated feature/puzzle game hybrid in the style of the Triplets of Belleville. The premise alone is worth the price of admission. The hardware seems to barely keep up with the ambition. It's almost adorable watching Curious Village's very compressed cutscenes on such a small screen. It helps that the Layton series immediately shows its eye for creating an evocative image or two. There's a certain absurdist quality to the idea of a Ferris wheel chase sequence that's hard to forget. And though the rest of St. Mystere resembles an archaic European settlement, the tower is a completely incongruous beast. A monument to improbable architecture, looming over several screens across the game. And in the middle of all this, Curious Village manages to throw in a classic arch nemesis, who looks like this and talks like this.
Here I come!
It's so goofy. Then we add some excellent accordion music to the mix, alongside some memorable sound design, from picking up a hint coin to solving a puzzle to standard shock sound effects. And what are we left with? We're left with something suitably distinctive. More than anything, Curious Village establishes a tone and voice for the series that remains irresistible. It might be why, despite all my misgivings, I just had to give Professor Layton one more chance. It was too compelling a combination to miss out on. The moment that first sold me on Diabolical Box comes when Luke tries to tear off Inspector Chelmey's face. I knew beforehand that the first 3 entries formed a trilogy of sorts, but I was still surprised to see the game gesture so concretely at continuity, to even go so far as to spoil one of the previous game's plot twists right out of the gate. So when I saw Flora reveal herself on the Mollentary Express, it convinced me that maybe the story of these games aren't only a pretext for puzzles. Maybe I should start paying attention. It's too bad Diabolical Box forgets about Flora just as quickly as it remembered her, but it was a nice thought at least. I'll be saving my Flora discussion for Unwound Future, don't worry. That's really the biggest improvement from Curious Village. Diabolical Box does a much better job at keeping the story moving. This is largely unsurprising, given that the game's setting is begging for some varied scenery. Rather than one solitary village, Diabolical Box has us boarding a train across multiple destinations, starting at London, exploring the train itself, then Dropstone. Quite unusually, it means we don't actually reach the main town of Diabolical Box until nearly the midpoint of the game. While it could be seen as similar to what Curious Village did, which also waited about halfway to begin a proper investigation into its main mystery, there's one other key difference besides setting changes that makes Diabolical Box's early jaunting more enjoyable: the characters. The characters in Curious Village being robots was a double-edged sword. While it suited the setting of the game, it also meant there was little reason to explore them as people. They didn't need, and probably shouldn't be, more than ciphers for the purposes of the story. Diabolical Box is not constrained in such a way, and it takes full advantage of this fact. The first few chapters are spent getting introduced to the major players, who very much have their own unique desires and motivations. Inspector Chelmy suspects foul play in the death of Dr. Schrader, whose office was clearly robbed sometime during the incident. But he has little time for wannabe detectives fouling up his investigations, especially a detective who keeps little boys around as apprentices, in one of the series' most amusingly self-aware lines. So he confiscates our evidence and impedes our progress, even competing with us on the Momentary Express to see who can find the missing Tom first. Elsewhere on the train, we're introduced to Beluga, the owner of the Express, who seems to have some mysterious interest in the box and spends most of his time chewing out his nephew. While exploring Dropstone, we see the servants plan in secret to let Katya run away from home aboard the Express. But to what end? By the time we reach Full Sense, all of these threads start to come together. Chelmy, Beluga, Katya are all asking around for the box, and it would seem Layton and Luke have found themselves in a makeshift race to see who can find it before the other. This dynamic between multiple characters means the game can build stronger conflicts and evolving relationships to propel the story along, rather than rely solely on one-and-done NPCs that are only needed for the next tidbit of information. Certainly it makes for a more exciting pointing scene. Seeing all the egos clash as Chelmy is certain he's found his man, or Sammy airing out his grievances to his stepdad, or Beluga trying to take the box under false pretense, is only possible because of the time the game has deliberately spent with them. Not to suggest that these are the deepest characters you'll ever see, rather, the point is that Diabolical Box creates more specific characters with specific motives for us to become invested in, enabling more investing drama. The puzzles, too, have seen some subtle yet significant improvement, smoothing out the experience. Hino stated in an interview that they attempted to make the selection this time around more cohesive with the narrative. Though I enjoy many of the puzzles that appear in the tower, it is a little strange that the final two puzzles in Curious Village are an extended subtraction problem in drawing squares. That doesn't relate much to the game at all. These two puzzles alone took me over an hour to solve, by the way. I don't know what that says about me. Curious Village did have puzzles that matched the context, like nighttime-themed puzzles appearing during the night, or puzzles that directly related to the story, like piecing back together the vase Don Palo tries to frame us with in the marketplace, but as Hino suggested, it's much more common in Diabolical Box. Importantly, these puzzles usually depict actual locations in the game, like the Doctor's home, where we have to physically locate Dr. Schrader's flat, or Train Swap and its sequel In the Tunnel, where we move the Momentary Express itself to its destination, or Scrambled Photos, where we investigate the order of 4 photos of one of Full Sense's locations, and Where's the Hotel to find where the hotel is. The puzzles are also just more fun to solve as a matter of course. Besides a new memo feature, there are far fewer bizarre riddles like puzzled aliens or obnoxious tasks like spare change. The difference in philosophy is pretty apparent. Curious Village featured a magic square puzzle which left you almost entirely to your own devices. In Diabolical Box's magic square, however, the game implicitly gives you the number to add up to if you think to look at the diagonal before you start placing tiles. That does mean it's a bit easier, but as someone who had also just spent 20+ minutes fumbling around with the previous iteration, I can't say I was entirely displeased with the help. Sometimes it's better to keep the story flowing. As a tangent, and this applies both to Curious Village and Diabolical Box, I've finally started to grow an affinity for the math puzzles. Once you realize that no puzzle ever requires more significant arithmetic than the area of a square or the substitution of a variable, they become more fun to work through as you find out where the square is and which variables need to be substituted. Flower Bed Fun is one of my new favorite puzzles now after actually trying to work it out. On the flip side, any puzzle involving knots or dice nets are just the worst. After so long, I still struggle with these. Of course, in the grand scheme of things, there may be a simpler explanation for Diabolical Box's more engaging pacing. It's just a more engagingly presented game. I mentioned before how character portraits now face each other when speaking instead of directly at the screen, but there are other little quality of life improvements that make the experience more investing. There's now a new icon differentiating when a character just wants to speak to you versus when they want to give you a puzzle, letting you know what you're getting into right as you're getting into it. In Curious Village, a pop-up would display every time a new significant mystery occurred, but since there was really no reason to visit this menu on your lonesome, the mystery tab essentially went unused until the ending. In Diabolical Box, the game shows the mysteries being added in lieu of a pop-up. I've always thought it was a nice way to punctuate many of the story's more significant moments, which will later be used to great subversive effect in Unwound Future. Or examine the two games' final dungeons. The tower, atmospherically speaking, is a great last locale for Curious Village. The final test for Layton and Luke. Large, hollow rooms that seem to extend up for miles as the game inflicts its most difficult puzzles on us. But it's not exactly the most graceful thing narratively. The inciting event that kickstarts the chapter is the two getting caught in some random piece of loose rubble. Nearly all of the critical revelations happen at the base of the tower, and the following climb acts as what is effectively a lengthy exposition dump piecemealed on each floor, as Layton explains how the revelations on the base of the tower relate to each of the game's overarching mysteries one at a time. Layton even asks Luke to hold on to his questions until the next floor, so the game doesn't give away all the answers at once. It's almost like running down an answer key after taking a quiz. Not exactly the most emotionally affecting storytelling I've ever seen. Diabolical Box's final dungeon, on the other hand, well, my goodness, talk about this series' eye for evocative imagery. I'd go as far as to say it's avant-garde. Our investigation leads us to Hertzen Castle, a fortress levitating above a massive mineshaft, connected to land only via a single bridge. What happens inside said castle is a lot more interesting than collapsing debris. Vampires, shared hallucinogenic ballroom dance dreams, kidnappings, immaculately shot sword fights, towns vanishing into thin air. My favorite scene is this unusually quiet dinner between Layton and Anton.
Personally, I think it's quite spectacular.
Oh, is that so? Well, chalk it up to my bad taste then.
It's such a low-key, almost awkward way to begin the finale. The strength of these images can't be understated. Hertzen Castle is only a short segment of the game, but its impact is far-reaching. You'd be forgiven for thinking Anton is some major presence in the game, given the box art and discussion of the character, but he literally only appears in the last 45 minutes. Yet it's hard to argue he needed much more than that. Anton establishes an intimidating presence, helped in large part due to Mark Carr's performance.
Good evening. Welcome to my house.
So yes, an encounter at the end of the line is a great success of a climax, even down to having the best chapter title across any Layton game. Presence is the key word here. Diabolical Box's most inventive images may be towards the end, but truthfully the whole game is great at setting a tone. The concept of a box that kills whoever opens it is certainly the most blunt premise the Layton series has come up with. Each chapter begins with a sharp sting, confidently selling the dread. Luke notes that Full Sense is reminiscent of something from a horror novel, speaking to the general intentions of the game, if the gothic castle and vampire wasn't clear enough. A carriage runs through a giant metal gate on the western outskirts of town, leading into a dark fairy tale-esque forest. There's something enrapturing about Full Sense. The town is as bright as can be at night, but the streets are almost vacant. The lights are on, but is anyone home? Like with Curious Village, Diabolical Box also has its fair share of wandering, for largely the same purpose. The 5th chapter is entirely dedicated to exploring Full Sense, looking for scraps of a photo Chelmy accidentally dropped. Another excuse to become acquainted with the town. This nearly self-directed hunt does its job. Not only does it take us to new segments of Full Sense, we also hear interesting little tidbits of history from the townspeople, which eventually aid our investigation. In some sense, this photo scramble is a later game analog to the 2 chapters searching for Ramon and Saint Mystere, made more engaging through its brevity. My intention here isn't to uplift Diabolical Box at the expense of Curious Village, even if that's what I've ended up doing. What I simply want to suggest is that, though the 2 games are very similar to one another in the grand scheme, all the minute details present in Diabolical Box add up to a world of difference. While the comparatively single-minded presentation of Curious Village doesn't bother me nearly as much as it once did, I think it is exactly these minute details which explain my polar opposite reaction to these games so long ago. What ultimately allowed me to appreciate the series' charm and rich atmospheres without the overriding frustration. and if becoming better acquainted with those specific charms and frustrations allowed me to better understand the differences between Curious Village and Diabolical Box, it also allowed me to understand their undeniable similarities too. Curious Village and Diabolical Box are connected by a central concern, one that will continue to haunt the series for the remainder of its existence, possibly including New World of Steam if we are to believe its trailers. What exactly does civilizational progress look like? A common answer is the rise of industry and cityscapes, paired with the booming of new technologies that allow us to reach further frontiers and connect with people faster than ever before. The Layton series on the whole is deeply skeptical about this answer, that in our rush to actualize humanity, we may be losing something far greater. Last Spectre worried that the discovery of the Golden Garden would transform Mistallery from a storied landmark into a gaudy tourist trap, while the single factory in town had to be shut down after it began to poison the air. Miracle Mask paralleled the growth of Monte d'Or with the decline of the rural Stansbury, Randall using that fact as evidence Henry had betrayed his heritage for wealth and power. Azran Legacy saw a great civilization ruined as its technological leaps coincided with a rapid moral decay, causing Layton to reject the technology the Azran left behind. Cantabella's desire in Verses to bring industry to Labyrinthia indirectly brought about the Great Fire that incinerated the town. Indeed, it is hardly a coincidence the series frequently presents villainous forces using steam-powered machines to bring about their destruction. Curious Village and Diabolical Box engage in similar imagery. For the series, the pleasant Saint Mystere is the prototype of beauty, the kind of rural pasture that must be protected at all costs. Diabolical Box states this belief quite directly when speaking to Anderson about his village. These picturesque hills, these happy people, Dropstone has been blessed with so much. Sophia turned this place from nothing into a village full of warmth and camaraderie. Dropstone mustn't ever be allowed to wither and fade like so many other villages. After all, too many sacrifices were made to make this place what it is. It's a very pointed speech in a game like Diabolical Box, which directly contrasts the country village of Dropstone with its opposite. Full Sense, beautiful as it may seem, is a town full of the Layton series' worst fears, a vast mining operation encircled by gears, cogs, and cranes. The mines were lucrative enough to earn Full Sense the title of the Gilded Town, and it is here where we start to see why the series may be so skeptical about industrialization. Anton records in his logs that his father became obsessed with mining gold and other ore, so much so that his efforts literally formed a crater around the castle. The Duke's obsession had its consequences. His youngest son left him, tired of his antics, and outsiders began to catch wind of the town's raw materials. Full Sense used to be home to many families of noble birth. Then Duke Herzen discovered a vast gold deposit on the outskirts of town, which changed everything. Full Sense developed rapidly, but word of the gold brought in all sorts of unsavory types. It's such a shame. This used to be such an enchanting town. The series sees these elaborate industrial projects not as human advancement or achievement, but as an extension of the nobles' greed, made for and by the most avaricious among us. Curious Village more subtly touches on this same point. If Diabolical Box had its suspicions about Full Sense's Duke, Curious Village shares this suspicion with Baron Reinhold. Upon reaching the fortune that lay below Saint Mystere, the late Baron reveals the mechanism that underpins the entire village. Once Reinhold's inheritance is extracted, the robots will go dormant and the village will shut down completely. Much as how robbers sully the enchanting atmosphere of Full Sense, the Seeker of the Golden Apple will destroy Saint Mystere by taking its wealth. Knowing now how the series feels about quaint rural villages, it shouldn't be a surprise that the game finds this an unacceptable outcome. Layton and Luke do not take the inheritance, and Saint Mystere is saved. Yet this should not be read as a singing endorsement for everything this village was. No, for as picturesque as Saint Mystere should be, there is something very wrong with the village, something that makes it not quite as idealistic as Dropstone. The original trilogy, far more than the prequel trilogy, is obsessed with moments frozen in time. In Diabolical Box, Full Sense ends up being completely illusory, its visage permanently stuck at the 50-year-old depictions adorning the town's train station. Saint Mystere, too, is a town held in stasis. The Duke designed it to sit and wait until Flora was ready to move out in the world. He recreated personalities from his life, such as his late wife, to maintain her beyond her expiration date. And of course, Flora herself must not ever be allowed to leave until the hunt is complete. Luke ponders at the beginning of the game why Layton would bother looking into an inheritance dispute. He is a professor of archaeology after all, and this hardly seems relevant to his chosen discipline. With Curious Village and Diabolical Box, we get a kind of answer to Luke's question. St. Mystere and Full Sense may not be your traditional archaeological expedition, but in their timeless state of decades-long past, the towns begin to resemble perfectly preserved dig sites. Naturally, time cannot remain frozen forever. Inevitably, it will begin to move again, taking that perfect moment with it. The robots in the village slowly fall into disrepair, causing Bruno to scurry around the town fixing them. The Baron cannot handle the recreation of his wife, so he alters her personality to make a new person. It's at this point Luke wonders about the humanity of the village's residents. Do you suppose these robots feel sadness? Honestly, I'm not quite sure, but I have a feeling that each of these robots has something not unlike a human heart. What do you think? I hope that they do. It's an obvious question the Baron never once cared to consider. Instead of robots, he instead made a village of disposable people who might deserve better. There's just one key discrepancy between the two towns. In the end, St. Mystere is left untouched, and the villagers get to continue on as they were. On the other hand, the specter of Full Sense is broken. The town left behind is a lifeless husk. Why? If St. Mystere can be redeemed, why can't Full Sense? Why must one of these settlements be destroyed, but not the other? Flora holds the answer. She, unlike her father, is deeply concerned about the well-being of the villagers. After discovering that we have the key to the tower, she pleads with Layton to stay away from it. If outsiders were to discover the secret of St. Mystere, it would endanger the very people she wishes to protect. Her warning foreshadows her decision at the end of the game. When confronted on what should be done with the Reinhold fortune, Flora requests that it remain exactly where it is. If the village needs the fortune to function, then no one should have it, not even its rightful inheritor. It's a decision that opposes the greed animating a town like Full Sense. While Sophia formed Dropstone to protect her unborn daughter from Full Sense's toxic fumes, Anton was unwilling to leave. Anton's out-of-date vision for Full Sense is based on what he believes ought to belong to him. That as Duke, he should have all the fortune, the town, and most importantly his Sophia by his side, exactly where he wants her. The very idea of not possessing these things enrages him, succinctly put when he believes Layton is having an affair with his lover.
Sophia belongs to me. You can't have her.
The madness which Anton chronicled in his journal has evidently disfigured him as well. And this is the true curse of the Gilded Town. Full Sense is a parasite, its scenery created by leeching off the malice and selfishness of its host. And only when Anton claims he can see the world clearly again does the illusion of Full Sense vanish. Thus, we get the answer to our puzzle. Both stuck in time, the two towns are in fact opposites. Full Sense thrives on greed, while St. Mystere withers by it. Under that logic, an act of selflessness can only save one of them. So long as this fact remains true, St. Mystere will last forever, the Layton series argues. One of the best moments in Curious Village happens when Don Palo accuses Layton of murder. Only he lets one too many details slip during his accusation, causing Layton to smile and calmly destroy Don Palo's entire claim with irrefutable facts and logic. Layton's argument manages to satisfyingly tie together all of the events of the game, showing why, chronologically, it is impossible for an Inspector Chelmy to have entered the village at the time of Simon's death. It's the first time Curious Village, and really the Layton series as a whole, shows us the prowess of Layton's deductions. It's one of those few moments where the character of Herschel Layton gets to shine. Curious Village and Diabolical Box alone represent a unique iteration of the Layton series. In this version, Layton and Luke are little more than conduits to facilitate the current story, familiar archetypes to latch onto while traveling to a bizarre or unusual land. These are characters well suited to telling countless episodic adventures with. Playing through these games again, it's easy to forget how long it took for many of the so-called staples to appear. In the Layton series, animals can talk, and some characters like Luke can communicate with them. Well, that never actually happens in Curious Village. It's established Luke has a fondness for animals, but nothing further. It isn't actually established in Diabolical Box either. Sure, the hamster speaks in the minigame, but not anywhere outside of that, nor does Luke ever talk to an animal directly. Diabolical Box technically begins in Gressenheller University, but it's never called that in the game. You'd be forgiven for thinking it was just an apartment. Barton doesn't get a voice yet. Unwound Future would open the Diabolical Box, so to speak. It would give more focus on our main leads, give them specific backstories and histories, which would begin a chain reaction. Now, Layton is a character with a concrete history, friends, lovers, parents. He grew older, had adopted children, far too many adopted children. Unwound Future, fittingly enough, placed a ticking clock on the series' lead that can't be rewound or forgotten. With that knowledge, it makes the first two games a little more special. Much like the towns of Saint Mystere and Full Sense, Curious Village and Diabolical Box are the only Layton games that present us with a truly timeless Herschel Layton.